why aren't you working as hard as me,
Yeah.
young whippersnappers? But I would never, you young whippersnappers. I am a boomer, aren't I?
Welcome to season 2 of The Reflection. We started this series in March 2020 after the announcement of the lockdown and COVID-19 began to change the world.
For 20 weeks, academics, activists and journalists joined us to discuss everything from the UK government's mishandling of the pandemic, the growth of conspiracies, Black Lives Matter, and what it was like to bear witness to the growth of existing local and global inequalities.
For this season, our guests will be reflecting on the political climate of the past year, and we'll be talking to authors who have released books in 2020 concerning matters of race and class.
Welcome to another episode of Surviving Society's Reflection series, the series where we talk about race, class, politics over the past year. Also the series where we talk to sociologists, academics, journalists, organisers, activists that have produced critical interventions over the past year. Today we are actually joined by Surviving Society alumni and our good friend, Dr. Rima Saini, who is a lecturer in race in the School of Law at Middlesex University. She is Sociology Programme Co-Leader. She's a trustee of the British Sociological Association. She is the Social Policy Research Centre Co-Director. She's a specialist in race, class, statistics and the South Asian middle classes. Rima, look at that. Credentials.
Wow,
It's a long list.
It is a long
It's a long list.
And also, like, Surviving Society listeners that have been on the journey with us for the past sort of 3 to 4 years will remember that Rima's been on the show before. And last time Rima was on the show, it was before you had finished your PhD, and now you're a big woman with all these credentials.
I know. I mean, you know, I did not expect to even sort of pursue a career in academia. Frankly, at that point, I was just trying to sort of enjoy what I was doing, finish my PhD, of course. At that time, this was before the pandemic, before everything started popping off.
2018, it was when we last spoke. Yeah.
Well, some stuff had started popping off, Brexit and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But it was a very, very different time, and, you know, I was very, very centred on the PhD at that point. And I wasn't even entirely sure whether I wanted to pursue a career in it. But, you know, it's sort of come to fruition now. And it's difficult. It's hard. We can get into that. But I'm really enjoying it. And I'm really sort of glad of where I am right now. You'll get a lot of early career researchers who I think have these multiple titles and these multiple roles. And it's really because, especially when you're a woman of colour, you're just trying to establish yourself in the field. You're trying to put your name to as many things as you can, get engaged in as much as you can, and take some agency over what you're doing and what the discourses are. So I think that's sort of reflective of where I am at the moment.
I completely agree, Rima, particularly with the sort of like the different kind of credentials that you're trying to get or do achieve. Like, one of the things that I've been thinking about more recently, particularly after submitting my PhD, is I was saying to these guys and saying to my friends as well, do you think I'm a serious person? I keep asking people that. Like, as in, do you think I'm
loaded question?
Like, as in, do you think I'm a serious person? And like, everyone laughs when I say that, and I'm like, that's because I don't think people think I'm a serious person, but I am a serious person.
No.
So I completely.
But it depends in what context you're talking about, right? Like, when it comes to doing what you do, right? Both of you, when it comes to being organised and doing what you're doing, you're serious, right? That's what you mean by a serious person, to be taken seriously by your peers. And you are, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God, we're getting right into it already, aren't we? But like, when Rima was talking, that I was thinking, I do think it's just so much harder for us to be taken seriously.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay.
You worry about how you come across, how you sound, what you dress like, how much you laugh even, you know, how much you are willing to say, okay, that's fine, that's good enough. You know, and that's where the perfectionist tendencies come in, because you've always got this narrative at the back of your head that people think I'm just sort of a silly girl who's beyond her depth, essentially, I think.
But also, like, my question to people, like, do you think I'm a serious person, is also coupled with, I want to be, like, silly, and, like, I do want to be, like, playful, and I do want to be, like, so it's really hard. Like, I do. Yeah,
right,
sorry.
so listen, so when I see you, right, and both of you, it's about your personality, right? How true, how authentic you are. So you can be serious and still be how you are now. So when you do the podcast and you're making bookings and all that, you're still serious, but you're still jokey. And that's part of your technique almost.
But that's the balance, isn't it? And I guess in academia, when you do stuff or when you present yourself in a way that isn't kind of sort of straight, do you know what I mean by straight?
Yeah.
Then it can be it can be challenging, I think, to get people to see you as serious.
Do you know what, Matt? Like, I remember, so starting my career and going through my career in finance, I used to be worried about those questions.
Oh, God.
All those
absolutely.
things there. But then I got to a point now, as age thing, right?
Yeah.
I don't give two fucks, right?
Yeah.
It's a mad thing. When you get to that point, and I look back and I can see people in their 30s or in their 20s, and I can see them. Like, when I was at Canary Wharf and I saw like a bunch of 28-year-olds, and they're super ambitious, doing all those things. And it's like an act, because everyone goes through the similar kind of things. You see these traits, man.
I agree, but I guess it's a balance, because it's like, I want to not care, but then I get like an academic or someone treat me like shit, or treat me like I'm not of value.
You're not in a position, you're not yet, you have to care at the moment. That's the game. That's the game.
Yeah, and the importance is not to internalise that.
Yes.
So whether it's a function of their own personality, or whether it's, you know, them acting on what the culture is within academia itself, I think it's very much, you know, it's a cliche, but it's just staying true to yourself insofar as you can, because otherwise you won't survive. You know, you can't have that public-private distinction within academia, because what we're talking about, what we're doing, we do it like 10 hours a day, and it's very, very close to our own lived experience and our own, you know, lives.
Speaking of which, that's a great segue into reminding the listeners about your research, Rima. Rima, tell the listeners about what your PhD research is focused on, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the work you've been doing at Middlesex as well.
Absolutely, yes. So for those of you who haven't obviously gone and listened to my previous podcast before listening to this one, my doctoral research, which I completed in 2019, I think I graduated. I was very, very lucky to have my graduation in person before the pandemic started, actually. It was on the South Asian middle classes, as Chantel said. So it was mixed method, which means that I analysed existing statistical survey data. So the British election study and the citizenship survey, which at that point, sort of at the beginning of the 2010s, had, which is very rare nowadays even, a large ethnic minority sample of people, asking them about their social identities, asking them about their political identities. And then I did some interviews as well with British South Asian professionals, so Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis. And I was just trying to sort of ascertain the effects, I would say, of social mobility on the socio-political identities of these types of people.
So is that, it's just to cut you there for the listeners, is that working out whether, when the various South Asian professionals that you spoke to, whether when they transition classes, whether that makes them become more left-wing or right-wing?
Well, that was absolutely one of the things that I wanted to find out. My research, it was quite exploratory at the time. I think now, I'm going to bring their names in now with Rishi Sunak, Priti Patel, now with that we've known since Brexit and since the last few elections, the 2010, 2015, 2017 and so on, that British Indians specifically are a big middle class sort of Tory voting base and Brexit voting base. Back then, when I started around 2014, 2015, it was still very exploratory. But that was one of the things I wanted to find out. You know, when you've come from a working class background, an immigrant background as well at that, and you've sort of, you know, gone up into the stratosphere, you know, some of my participants had, earning huge amounts of money, huge amounts of responsibility in sort of their respective professions. What sort of effect does that have on how you relate to your ethnic group? And we know that ethnicity and race are so bound up with class as well. How do you think of yourself in terms of class? And what sort of effect does that have on the way that you think about politics?
Sick, innit?
It's sick. I think obviously what's brought into kind of view is the tension, like you said, between the ethnic groups, right? So the idea is, once you make it, are you part of the establishment? And what's your relation to your ethnic group once you're part of the establishment? And this is what, I guess, with black people, that's what we're having with the kind of black people who are part of the kind of neoconservative wave in America, or the Sewer Report.
Oh, God.
Sewer Report, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll bring that up later on the show.
So it's that kind of dynamic is quite interesting, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is sort of, you know, not to jump forward, but I guess in my discourse, in my teaching, in my writing now, I can't, you know, address this issue of sort of class and race without talking exactly about, the authors of the sewer report, without talking about...
Sorry, we call it the sewer report. Sewer report on this show, as in sewage, sewer.
I know. I was really, really glad, actually, just a little segue. I organised a statement or a letter or a petition back in March, April, that was signed by hundreds and hundreds of people at my university, that went to our VC, that was agreed on by the executive, that we would make a statement saying that the sewer report is a sewer report.
That was
a fantastic effort.
Incredible.
We got huge, well, not me, but our vice chancellor at Middlesex got a huge amount of flack on Twitter. You should have seen some of the comments saying, this is not your place. You should give up your role for a person of colour if you think that, institutional racism exists, all this sort of stuff. But I was really, really pleased that we took a stand and a public stand against that, because a lot of institutions didn't. Yeah.
Silence.
Exactly.
Just to come back, Rima, to your research. So could you tell us sort of some of the key findings?
Yeah.
Or some of the key themes about how, different groups, and if we could have some ethnicized specificity as well, that would be good. No, because we do, I do think we could be better on this show at making the distinctions between South Asian groups, because it is really important. Like, obviously, as you know, it's really important because there are sharp disparities, particularly if we're talking about Bangladeshis as well.
Definitely. I mean, you said it, Chantel, like the big difference, I would say, even though, so we were talking about this before we came down to the studio today, that, there were issues in the PhD because Bangladeshis are a relatively small percentage of the population. When you're trying to analyse a specific middle class subset of them, you get into problems analytically as well, because the stats aren't as quote unquote robust, but we can get into that. But what I did find, particularly with the interviews, is that there's really different dynamics between Bangladeshis, Pakistanis and Indians. Even if they work in the same sector, they have the same level of responsibility and income. A lot of that is because it stretches back. We're talking about imperial colonial times, these sort of stratifications kind of stretch back. But a lot of it is, what did they come with when they arrived in the UK? A lot of East African Asians, not all of them, came with capital. And by capital, I mean, they came with language skills. They came with some form of business know-how, education, qualifications, these sorts of things. And other groups didn't. Particularly those who came from rural groups, so maybe Punjabi Sikhs, but not always, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis in some cases as well. And then it's the way that you're racialised in this country, and it's the way that the government plays off groups against one another. And we've seen that increasingly now. Sort of British Indians are like the Tory darling, of all, ethnic groups. And one of the key reasons is because they're not predominantly Muslim, and this is where we get into the institutionalised Islamophobia.
Here we go.
Right to both.
Right, so listeners, we're bringing back the Rishi Feces, right? Rima.
So basically, Rima, what we were talking about was who's going to take over from Boris Johnson, right?
And I was like, it's going to be Michael Gove. And then T was like, no, it's going to be Rishi. And I said, they will not have a brown prime minister. And T was like, he's not Muslim. And I was like, shit.
And he's a city boy, right? He's a banker. He's the banking guy.
He's not a Muslim, and he's rich.
And he's rich, and he's a money guy. And listen, and obviously it's been in the press recently about him. He's the one that's been signing off all the good stuff of the pandemic, right? So most importantly, all the contracts they handed out, who signed them off? He had to, because he is the finance.
With his little signature thing.
So all the people, every group that got money, from the working classes to his rich pals, it's down to him, not Boris Johnson. Boom.
It is interesting. We need to hear.
I don't
Rima's,
like to boast. Listen,
we need to hear Rima. We need to hear Rima's full thoughts on it. But yeah, there is. The British public are very much enticed by money and Islamophobia, and it does feel like Rishi ticks those. But equally, I'm like, but then Michael Gove.
And listen, Rishi, he's not taking. Have you noticed? So even politically, whenever stuff's gone badly, he's never to be seen.
About Greensill.
Who's the main protagonist?
David Cameron.
Exactly.
Fine.
Rishi's slick, man.
Yeah.
But we don't say not slick as in like good, like we fucking hate him. But but like for the purpose of the Rishi thesis. For the purpose of the Rishi thesis. Contextualise to the thesis. Right. Rima, tell us about.
He's not sloppy as well. He keeps receipts. He's very low key. He's not overly political. And, whenever there has been questionable things in the past to do, particularly with his wife's billionaire, multi-billionaire family and funds, the contracts that he's given out as well, you know, those sort of private behind-the-scenes handshake sort of deals. Again, he's very much, well, I've done everything by the book, you know, and this has been audited and this is absolutely fine, you know, that sort of thing. So he is slick. But again, Boris Johnson is the complete antithesis of slick. I don't think he's completely lost public favour either. So whether people are willing to go completely the other way is yet to be seen.
No, Rima, it's not about public favour with Boris Johnson. He hasn't got enough cash. He needs to make more money. He's got too many kids. He's got his new wife. He's popping out more kids. He needs more cash. He's going to quit because he actually doesn't even want to do it. He doesn't want to work, and he also needs more cash. He can make more cash not being Prime Minister.
Do you know what it is?
So it's who's going to replace him.
I think at the moment, Boris Johnson, I think what we haven't done is foreground power into it. Boris Johnson is skint, but he has that power. And that, like with Trump doesn't need the money or be there, but and in fact it restricts him because he could do more as a private citizen, but they're addicted to that power.
Yeah.
And so Boris Johnson might stay for the power, but listen, what we've known from the Tories historically, if that leader jeopardizes their electoral fortunes going forward, and it looks like he's bungling it, right? So they'll replace you. It won't come from the people, it'll come from internally. And this is what the Tory party are famous for. So Brexit is effectively an internal argument from the Tory party that's gone live, right? So they were Eurosceptics at one point, and then next thing you know, we've got Brexit, right?
Yeah, I agree with you, T. And with regards to just wrapping up the Rishi thesis, I think that it's almost becoming a bit of a David Davis situation. As in, it's almost becoming too obvious. You know, it was like David Davis is going to be the next David Davis is going to be the next Tory leader, and then David Cameron came in round the back. Who could come round the back? No one.
No one. I swear that because
listeners, you'll know that me and Tisa have got £100 bet on this. So
no, wait,
we actually have got £100 bet.
You're very invested.
Yeah, we are invested.
No,
Tory politics.
Janda threw that in the gauntlet. She went like £100. I was like, raw, boy, I haven't got that kind of P. You get me? I spent it on trainers, man.
I just couldn't imagine. The Prime Minister being a brown man, but actually, like in this panoramic 2021 sewer report madness of a plague island. Yeah.
But again, it's, you know, sort of what is he... I mean, I wouldn't know how he would portray himself on that campaign trail. It's a complete question mark to me. And I think that is what his success will hinge on if he chooses to go down that route.
So this is what was quite interesting as I was thinking about your research, Rima. What I think, when you said how the Southeast Asians are the kind of Tory voting darling, like
the Indians specifically, yeah.
So I think what happens is he remains neutral, and people will impart their stereotypes onto him. Like, I don't know, like whatever the positive stereotypes are related to that particular group, they will impart it. And so that's what I was thinking. In terms of like,
they're good at getting the job done.
Exactly.
Or like, they're good with money.
Those kind of stuff.
They work hard.
They be diligent, and they're not going to be extremists. They're quite, and all those kind of negative, those stereotypes, and the public will impart that onto him. All he has to do is just remain blank, neutral. But how do those stereotypes and in the context of gender affect people? How people view Priti Patel?
Yeah. So you know there is, and this is why it's really.
Sorry, Rima, we've not brought you in as in like our South Asian power to answer all the South Asian questions.
I'm more than happy to be that person though, because I spend every day thinking about, and I'm very much embedded within the community, you know, and one of my regrets in my PhD, I guess, is not foregrounding my own reflexivity enough and being more honest about that. And people had said to me in the process, you're just researching people like you, aren't you? You know, is this some sort of kind of odd sort of journey you're going on psychologically? And I'm just like, well, no. But, you know, it's my life as well. You know, my husband's family are partly East African, Indian, Hindu, and my dad's and my mum's are from India, and they're Sikh and Hindu, and seemingly very different backgrounds, but very much within this socially mobile, everyone owns a care home or is a pharmacist or a doctor or an accountant.
Oh, you drink as well?
And we drink. We're not threatening in that way. We do the things that British people do, and that's good, you know. And, you know, we go out and we have fun and this sort of stuff. And so that's non-threatening, essentially. In relation to Priti Patel, it's really difficult because I see people saying things about her on Twitter, and secretly I'm just like, yes, she's an awful, awful human being. but there is a gender dimension and dynamic there, which we can't ignore, and I think which hasn't yet been addressed, because all that has been talked about and discussed is her horrible disgust, not disgust, but I have been disgusted by just the complete and utter disregard with which she addresses and approaches the humanity of people of colour, of immigrants, of refugees, and so on and so forth.
It's when she grins. What is that?
I know.
It's the grin. It's the grin.
That's taking it deep. I didn't even notice the grin.
Did you not notice the grin?
Nah, listen,
it's when she's grinning.
Yeah.
When someone basically says to her, like, on camera, like, are we going to address the humanity of these people? And she's like, not today, and then smiles.
Oh, shit.
Sorry, but yeah, let's talk gender.
And the policing and the bordering aspect of this. And, you know, as of yet, I've not seen her really show any investment in sort of women. Yes. Thank you for that picture of the smirk. It's like a one-sided thing as well. It's just like, I don't want to smile, but I'm evil, so I can't help it, sort of.
Oh, don't worry, we've got Kemi, Equalities Minister.
Yeah.
We've got our own.
I mean, there you go.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
There are prominent Muslims and there are prominent black people as well within the cabinet. And it's really, you know, I'm writing a paper at the moment with Rima Begum.
Oh, we love Nima. Big up Nima.
And Mike Bankole.
Oh, amazing.
Yes. Which we're going to present next week. For those of you listening later, that would be sort of mid-September 21. We wanted to write about ethnic minority conservatism and populism. There's such little literature on the you know, class fractions, you might call it, of Black Caribbean and Black African populations who are conservative or who are or socially mobile. There's a lot more on British South Asians, so we've sort of gone back down that route. But yeah, those dynamics are really, really interesting. And some of the stuff Kemi has said about CRT as well, it's not completely unsurprising.
Critical race theory, just for listeners. Yeah,
critical race. It's not completely unsurprising, because I do have students come to me, some of my black students, my black female students as well, who do think, okay, you know, it's very pessimistic, it's very negative. But I think it's the way that we teach it, the way that we approach it, the way that we kind of understand critical race theory. I think Jean Beeman, who's looked at some of the issues that I look at in my doctoral research as well, this idea of middle classness and belonging amongst minority groups, and she's looked at that in the context of France, also says we need to come back and we need to think about, you know, CRT is not about saying you're victimized, you've got no control, you've got no agency, you've got no power. You know, it's about understanding the machinations of institutional racism and how that is reproduced or filtered through people in all different subsections in society, you know. So that's why my thesis was called Between Privilege and Prejudice, because it's not either or, you know.
I've just come back to your student that came up to you and was like, this, it all feels really negative. I think particularly in this current conjuncture, like where is the hope? I guess as you're learning about critical race theory and you're understanding, okay, so this is why that happened to my mum, this is why that's happening to my uncle, this is why this is happening to me. What can I do about it? Oh, nothing, because we've got authoritarian capitalism. So it is you do feel like where is the hope? Where is where is our leadership that is fighting against institutional racism? We don't have it. So I guess I empathise with that student, but equally, like, the right way to go isn't believing that that things are gonna be better. Like, that's what they will tell you.
Do you know what I think it is? I think it is things like CRT. They add to what disenchantment, right? So I imagine, like, that's the idea of the voice with the veil. What CRT does, it brings a sharp reflection, reality, and once you start seeing the reality, you're thinking, "Oh, I want to go back. I'd rather have that ignorance, that veil of ignorance, to kind of to feel that happiness that you used to feel, but it's not happiness, but you're not really aware, right? But now once you bring those things into sharp reflection, you start seeing things how things really are, and it's quite depressing. You think,
Absolutely.
right? You think, wow, this is the situation I'm in.
But I think we all have sort of a responsibility to, you know, as Tissot said, sort of shine a light on these things, because the paper that I wrote with Ali a few years ago, Ali Megji, was about how we can reproduce post-racialism and in turn benefit sort of white supremacy if we don't say, okay, we've been successful, we've got here, we've achieved this, but it was really hard, and perhaps we are the exception. It's not about amplifying our own personal successes or experiences that may be positive to our whole group and saying, well, actually, you're the reason why you're not successful, or you're the reason why you're unhappy, or you're the reason why your particular ethnic group have not done well. That's really damaging and really harmful, But I think, I would say the young, like people in their 20s nowadays, I think because of especially the climate catastrophe, they're a lot more ready to link all of these up together within the larger sort of kind of neoliberal, authoritarian, as Chantel said, machinations of what's going on. And they're a lot more sophisticated.
You just said that again, machinations. I love that word.
It's a sick word, isn't it?
What is it? What's it mean? Machinations.
I guess, it's the process. So things that are happening, what's going on, but machinations sort of sounds like it's engineered, and it is in a way by elites, essentially. So that's why I like it, I guess.
No, I like it. No, I agree with you. And younger people as well, like climate catastrophe, no housing, no jobs, pandemic.
There's a revolution.
Yeah.
The younger generations, they're not as embedded in that kind of neoliberalist agenda that definitely my generation. That's what it's for. That's what you brought up to believe in and to live out.
And this is the way you're going to survive.
To aspire to. And this is we're very kind of tightly wedded to that. But these guys, it's a bit more diffuse. They're still influenced by it, but in a more consumerist bent. So they don't really have that kind of narrow idea to make money. But they're kind of
No, I hear you, and I think. It's a shame we don't have someone from Gen Z on the show today. But T, you're considered Gen X. I think we're both millennials.
Yeah.
I was 88, so I think that...
Yeah, we're millennial.
Am I?
Yeah.
Oh.
What did you want to be? Gen Z?
Baby boomer, no.
Oh, baby.
45, someone give me a house.
We're considered by some Gen Zs as millennials, apathetic.
Yeah.
You guys were fucked over by baby boomers. Oh, we're all fucked over by baby boomers.
So generic. So I'm at the start of Thatcher. So I'm a true Thatcherite, like Thatcher baby. Grew up in the era, right?
Yeah.
So I guess the best idea, kind of, when someone said to me once, who embodies that kind of generation is, Harry Enfield's character, Loads of Money. A working class, and all he talked about was loads of money. I just want loads of money.
Yeah.
And so a working class person, they've been given that kind of step up by the middle classes. They're all very obsessed about money and buying properties and very selfish.
No, I completely get that vibe, especially since I've moved to Hertfordshire.
Babes, what are you saying about Hertfordshire?
Just the houses and the cars. Like everyone's got a Tesla,
Yeah, that's the new thing.
Why has everyone got a Tesla?
It's like a status.
They're so ugly.
It's a status thing. Like I've got
that tea thing.
Yeah, you go around. But listen, I went inside one.
Is it nice?
They're kind of sick still. Yeah, they're kind of sick.
I mean, the door handle is like you can't get because it's flush against the door, so you've got to like push in the handle and then the other side pops out, and I'm just like, no. I just want a normal door handle.
But I'm a
and
tech
key.
guy. I'm a tech guy, so I saw the screen and it's like got 3D things of the cars. I'm like that. Oh, sick's the future. It's gonna fly. They're gonna fly soon.
I know, hover cars. So those born 81 to 96 are millennials. Gen Z 96 or after. Gen X 65 to 80, and then boomers are 46 to 64, so in that post-war period.
We had Steve Roberts, we had him on the show, talks about social generation theory. Even though we can make sort of sweeping statements about sort of generations, he kind of says we shouldn't use it too much. We should actually focus more on what are the consistencies across generations, and the consistencies tend to be poverty, capitalism, elitism, racism.
Absolutely. And one thing that we perhaps don't draw attention to is where does the immigrant generation fall into the stereotypes that are made about these generations?
I was just going to say as well, and I don't know how this relates to your research, but I was talking to a friend earlier. I'm seeing my dad tonight. We're going to the theatre. Look at us, black middle class. And
what are you going to see?
I'm not going to say what we're going to see because I read the description, and honestly, like it's one of the activities that I do with my dad. We will go to the theatre together. I am not convinced he knows what's happening in the show, because I don't know what's happening. Like we go to like these really like
he's like that, as in
these really like theatre like monologue-y shows. And like I've got ADHD, so like I treat it as like as time to just sit and just focus, as in like, because I don't have many of those times. Anyway, why am I saying this to you? Right, I'm seeing my dad there, and I was talking to my friend about going to see my dad. My dad, although he definitely ingrained in me like a political consciousness, like, and he like protested, he was involved in like the riots in the 80s, like fought, like literally got stabbed by the National Front, protest for apartheid, all this stuff. But he's a Blairite, no doubt about it. And he's a centrist as well. And he's like what are they called? FBPPE Remainers.
Oh,
like,
yes.
Like, as in like, he's a hardcore Remainer.
#FBPE.
Yeah, like all that stuff.
Blue heart for the nurses.
And it's
still love Blair.
It's so interesting, like generationally, like my dad's an immigrant. The way we kind of just don't really click on politics now is really interesting. Like, we actually don't agree on maybe more things than not now. And what I find interesting about that is me and you, like, there are black people or immigrants and black and brown people that are older than me that I agree on everything with.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why did that happen to you? Like, why did you become, like, because you became socially mobile through work, but you were working class, and now you're more like lower middle class.
With me?
No, I'm talking about my dad. So I'm sorry, I'm having an anecdote. Sorry.
No, it's all
I'm just sort of, so why did he? Why does he think that like people need to pull themselves up by their bootstrap, but equally we need a centrist Labour government?
I mean, part of that might be a function of age.
Yeah.
And I have found myself recently.
Are you dabbling? Are you dabbling, Rima?
I completely overwork myself. I get resentful, and I'll say, well, why aren't you working as hard as me?
Yeah.
Young whippersnappers. But I would never... You young whippersnappers. I am a boomer, aren't I? Yeah.
I don't know if it's because when you're able to turn, like what you're talking about in your paper with Ali, when you're able to turn struggle into success, do you internalise that and individualise that? Because I would like to think that I will remain as I think I'm a compassionate person. I think I will remain that way. I also feel like people shouldn't have to work hard, to be honest. Like, I think it's overrated.
Yeah.
So where does that come from with some immigrant families, with some immigrant people? Like, why do we have that?
It's a very strong pull, because there is this, we came here with nothing and look what we've made. It is possible, it is achievable. But there's no deconstruction of, this idea of what is acceptable and conceivable in terms of working hard. No one should have to work 18 hours a day to be able to make a living.
Thank you.
No one should have to never take a holiday. No one should have to never have childcare, like my parents used to have 3 of us babies in the shop, My mum came back to work, 2 days after she got pregnant? She gave birth to my second sister, who was born 11 months after my first one. It's ridiculous. But then there's also this odd thing, and I was talking to my husband about this. Now they don't want me to work hard. They want me to chill out, relax, and somehow have just come into lots of money, because they were like, well, we did that sacrifice for you and we made it, and now you've made it. So why are you working this hard, Rima? So I think maybe that is breaking down a little, because now they're realising, oh, well, actually, nothing has changed.
No.
Really,
like in answer to your parents, and I guess where I think me and my dad can meet on this now. Neoliberalism, capitalism, the project has failed. No one's got any cash.
Absolutely.
The project's failed, but I think they think, especially if you're a boomer generation, they think they've made a sacrifice, right? And they see the sacrifice that they've made for you. So if you've got into university, or that was whatever their goal was, you become a doctor, or you've done it. So they think by their definition, you've assimilated, you've done what you meant to do, but not understanding how racism is a social dynamic that keeps changing. So you might have become that doctor, but that system's still there.
Absolutely. And now you can't buy a house for £13,000, which is what my dad bought his first house with, So, and they, there's not enough of this sort of critical political discussion, I think, that goes on in immigrant and especially South Asian families about this is, neoliberal capitalism. You keep voting for the Tories, they're not going to do anything about the housing market. And there's this very sort of objective way in which this is what the housing market is, that freehand economics. There is no intervention that anyone can have. This is never going to change. And that is completely sort of devolving agency and responsibility that we have as communities and individuals to, trying to do what we can, affect some political change, or at least affect some discourse around what's happening. But it's really difficult to broach these conversations within my family anyway, personally.
Why do you think that is?
Because I sound petulant, I sound pessimistic, I sound like a university student going out on her first protest. A lot of that is gendered, I think, as well. People, in my family, I don't think they necessarily will accept any authority that I have on knowing things about politics and sociology.
As in you, the critical race theorist, statistician, doctorate.
Yeah.
Listen.
But Rima, is it a kind of a cultural thing? So I'm just thinking personally from the guys that I know growing up, the Bangladeshi guys, but not from Dhaka, they're from Sylhet.
Yes.
So there is a kind of generational thing. So respect for your elders. So even if you might be talking like what the situation is now, out of deference, respect for your elders, like you need to just be quiet, respect for tradition and all those kind of things there. So it's quite interesting what you said about what they come with, like from when they're from.
Yeah.
So these guys have come from Sylhet, so they don't really have much. So when they come over here, the way they're racialized, they're at the bottom, so they're more likely to be left leaning, a bit more radical.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting that how it plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I saw that in my doctoral research in relation to some of particularly the first generation middle class Bangladeshi legal professionals who were very much happy to be embedded within, not happy, but they were very much embedded within their own communities, practicing there, serving that community. And, that proximity to their ethnic group, their proximity to that community, a community which has sort of working class histories, but also working class realities in a lot of cases, does influence politics a lot. And that was a surprising, but not surprising, I guess, sort of finding in the last chapter of my thesis, I think. And in terms of this sort of, there's some research that has been done in America on Asian Americans, specifically in sort of the myth of meritocracy, sort of stuff that Bridget Anderson has talked about. And, one of the findings or some of the findings in relation to that particular group are, if you criticize the country or the system that you have come into, you've immigrated, you've packed up everything, flown across the world trying to make a life, and if you criticize that, are you sort of looking down or criticizing your own decisions and your own path? You want to create this seamless, positive, linear image of progress. We've done the right thing, we've come to a country that accepts us and that is good and that is right, and I made the right choice. So by saying this country is pants, is that essentially just denigrating all the decisions that you or your parents' generation or your grandparents' generation have made in deciding to emigrate. So there is that sort of dynamic at play as well. Does that make sense?
It really does. And I've never really thought about it like that. There's like another layer to it. It's like, actually, this is the hill we've got to die on, because we
hear it in when white people say, well, why did you come here then? If it's that bad. So that's the most vulgar expression of it. Leave if you don't like it. But what we're having is, so it comes down to that kind of critical debate where what is a patriot, right? A true patriot in the kind of 18th century notion is someone that loves their country but can be critical of that country. And what we are in now is a nationalist debate. A nationalist can never say anything bad about the place that they're at. It's always the good stuff. So this is why the history we have is a nationalist version of history. It's not critical, it's unthinking. And this is the debate we're having now. So people they've kind of misappropriated the word. People call themselves patriots, but they're not. They're really nationalists because they're not so when they're talking about statues or whatever it is, it's that nationalist view of it. But we are, to be an immigrant to come with you're patriotic. You might love the motherland, but if you're an immigrant, you understand how bad it's been for you at the bottom. So when our first generation people come over here, they understand what it's like, but they still love the country and still speak out about it in a very, very heartwarming tones. But they still love it, but they're critical of it, and they'll tell you the bad stuff about the country.
Just coming back to the hypothetical white person that says, if you don't like it, go back. and it made me think about Gaminda Bambra's scholarship on thinking about beyond the island and going back to thinking about empire. So actually, like, I think all the stuff you've just said stands, T, but I guess the conversation or the pushback that maybe a lot of us people have been trying to do within sociology, social sciences for decades and decades is about saying to that white person, like, I am here because you were there. But it's all that stuff, isn't it? So it's like, actually, we're physically on this island, but we're all part of loads of islands together that were colonized. So it's the physical existence of us here is because of that colonization of our country. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know I'm putting some very, very brilliant scholarship into very simplistic terms, but I guess, and that pushback to that white person saying that, I guess, is maybe what we can talk about in the next part of this episode, is what we've been seeing over the past year since the pandemic and Black Lives Matter. But
I think also I'd add, it's trying to reconcile what always comes up, reconciling that we're all interlinked in some way. And,
exactly,
and it's those kind of build, and it's hard for people to understand how we can be linked, because at the same time we all talk explicitly in nationalist tones, right? So This is the UK, or this is a national business, or whatever it will be. But so there is an essentialism that sits there within us, but we also know practically that even our national dishes, tea is not a British dish, it's from India and China, and it's reconciling all these things that have built up over time. So it's a difficult conversation because it's not very clear, it's very messy, and people take sides.
Yeah.
We take sides,
and
right?
it's acontextual and it's ahistorical and it's fundamentally, symbolically and structurally violent. So Gaminda Bambra has talked about this idea of methodological nationalism, and that's exactly what you're talking about, Tiso, isn't it? That we think, in the context of nation states, completely constructed and completely, the boundaries between these nation states are what allows people like Priti Patel and our other ruling elites to say, no, you cannot come in, and you can come in, and you can't, and you can, and construct this sort of very affected sort of national kind of demographic. It's really, really harmful because we reproduce that as well then, don't we? And then we, in some of the survey data that I've analysed or looked at, it pits, do you feel more British or do you feel more Indian? India was, when my dad was born, India was British, and Britain and Indian citizens were actually British citizens at that time, if you can believe it, and beyond this sort of sanitized Commonwealth image, that's something that we have completely forgotten. And, people like Gaminda do really, really try and, she talks about how the welfare state, for example, in the UK is a function of and was funded by kind of imperial activities.
That's it. And Kwigwe Majula as well, as Gaminda does that as well. And when I hear them both talk about that, I'm like, shit, I need to sit down, because I'll sit here and be like, I'm sat in this room because of the welfare state, but I am sat in this room because of the welfare state, but equally people have died so I can have the welfare state. Do you know what I mean? Like when I first heard
our ancestors.
Yeah, when I first heard both of them present on that, I was like, whoa, that's a lot. Like,
absolutely. And then people talk about the NHS and the welfare state as this fantastic, or not so fantastic, sort of British institution. And immediately what you think about British is sort of our bounded isle and the white population and the white elites that constructed that.
But like I said, it comes back to the essentialism. So most people think of the nation state, welfare state story as something, like you said, essentially British, right? And not making that connection to the kind of roots that we're talking about. And that's because once you do that, it complicates things, and you start thinking, shit, like you said, that realization that someone died for me to have a decent life.
Yeah.
But it goes back to what I said yesterday, like we're all kind of a global warming, but what most of us doing about it? Throwing stuff away and thinking, yeah, it's cool. But you are understanding what the situation is, right? But once you think of the enormity, you start thinking, shit, maybe I better stop.
And once you start connecting yourself more viscerally to people across the world who are really suffering from it, then it becomes a much larger responsibility in your life. And that's something that obviously, the government is not interested in, because it would mean that we start sort of sharing our wealth, I guess, with other nations, and they're not interested in that at all.
No, definitely not. It would be really good to get some anecdotal thoughts from you on the past sort of year with regards to being an academic that specialises in race and class. thinking about June 2020, the Black Lives Matter uprisings, thinking about the assault that we're seeing on the humanities in the UK, also like the free speech people, which actually what they want is freedom to be racist, transphobic, homophobic. Just it's a bit of a peak time, I think, to be people like us that specialise in race and class, because we're being attacked at all sides now. Like government, media, peers, colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in academia, I don't, your Eric Kaufmans and so on and so forth, I never rated them. I always thought, okay, he's head of department at Birkbeck, but he's an absolute fraud. Mm-hmm. But then, recently we found out that Lisa Tilley has resigned because of, just how insidious he actually is. So it's really having repercussions for what our departments look like. It's really having repercussions for our own sense of belonging and our own scholarship and our own teaching within our sociology departments, within our higher education institutions. So it is getting more visceral and more worrying to me. I can't keep on dismissing people like him and, the other sort of academic free speech lobby people as just crackpots, I feel fortunate within Middlesex University that I've got, and obviously I'm not a huge fan of the word allies, but I do have people that, I feel are as invested in critical race theory and these other critical theories and interventions as I am. But then again, we are seeing this kind of very sort of superficial approach to EDI and decolonisation that's happening within institutions. And I want to be a part of those conversations, I am, but I also have to sit with that cognitive dissonance. What's happened over the past year, 18 months, has been, I think, really positive for affecting these conversations, but it's also led to a lot of sort of lip service, sort of superficial movements towards
Black
this idea of diversity, rather than sort of kind of radical action and intervention, as you said.
Yeah, and equity. Yeah.
Absolutely, just these fundamental conversations that I'm still having to have. Can we drop the word equality, people? Can we drop the word diversity? Equity, sure. Can we, think about what about social justice? What does social justice mean and racial justice look like within the context of the university? So it's an ongoing struggle, and it really exhausted me last summer. I felt really burnt out. But it's been a while now, and having these sorts of conversations and having more power, decision-making power within the university and within the field as well, has lent me sort of much more, I guess, sort of comfort in terms of being able to be honest about what I feel about these things. And I've had some research out, a paper published in Politics recently.
Big up, Rima.
Thank you. Finally.
Dr. Saini, come on.
About quantitative methods, teaching specifically, and how the way that we use, and particularly the way that we teach statistics, can be or should be sort of decolonised or approached in a decolonial way. And in that particular niche that I found with colleagues that I really love and esteem, I feel like I'm doing something really worthwhile now.
But see, what's interesting to me is, and especially in humanities and social sciences, is the origins of our disciplines, right? And so our origins tend to be in the colonial imperial era, right? So
absolutely.
But what I'm seeing is, I view it as us or the whole generation of immigrant children are in the system, and now we're challenging that dynamic. And so for a long time, so you effectively what you have is the old guard versus the new guard, and it was kind of brought to a head in June 2020. So that's the start of that kind of if the dam breaking, because it was building up, but the dam is broken. But there's a challenge now. So you have the old guard who are traditional and they're stuck there and they have a vested interest. So Eric Kaufman and all these guys are pushing back because they feel challenged now. And they feel that this is their time's up, and their discipline that they've grown to love and that's been canonized is being challenged in such a way that they can't really dispute, because they taught us those methods. And so all of a sudden you're using our logic against us. And so they have a very difficult time in arguing that, because we're doing peer-reviewed articles now. So we're using their epistemology to challenge what effectively has been taught for the last 150 years.
Absolutely. And I think, the fact that Eric Kaufman has gained sort of such traction or support outside of academia, I think shows that there are plenty of people within academia who are willing to say and think exactly the same things as you did, Tiso, about him, and are willing to challenge him, and are willing to show that the basis of what he thinks is not only methodologically spurious and, politically kind of out of line, completely out of line, out and out racist, but then you've got people outside who lap it up.
And I also think, and these are the people which I have the most issue with, I think there are some people that are apathetic as well, and I feel like that's sociology's middle name, particularly when it comes to race and class, is like apathy. And I don't want to take away from the people that we obviously, like, we run this show, we have loads of people come on this show that are absolutely amazing, people like yourselves, and there's so many people that are doing brilliant work, but I do think that there is, like, going full circle, like me saying, do you think I'm a serious person? There is a group of people within whether it's journalists, academics, people that want to talk about these issues, politics, that are struggling with the idea that they need to share intellectualism with us because they've held it, even if these are like lefty people as well, like they were the authority, and actually we're saying yeah we agree with most things you're saying, but what about this, what about that? And I think these are actually the people, like your Kaufman, dickhead.
I wouldn't even say he speaks or writes intellectually.
Yeah, so like we can do him, but actually like there's other people that are like in the middle. Absolutely. That I'm like, I need you to take me seriously, because you don't. And when I say me, I mean that as in the broad, not me as an individual. I mean that broadly.
I think what's interesting is what technology has done is decentralized information and knowledge and power. So you have all these people that who are almost voiceless, quiet, now have voices. So we have a podcast, right? So 10 years ago when I was growing up, someone like me, my peer group didn't have a peer. So in my generation, I witnessed people who were on the streets start going pirate radio stations, but it was illegal, right? So our voices were shut down. But now, with the advent of technology, many voices are being heard, and so you have people who are gatekeepers that like.
They're shook.
Yeah.
So find an example. Sorry, am I being a bit like individualised here?
Cool.
Find an example. Yeah, just talking about. So we're a sociology podcast, right? We're probably the biggest sociology podcast in the UK.
Yes, we are.
We've been running for 4 years now. Do you know how most popular sociology podcast in the UK?
You are on so many reading lists.
I know, I keep getting told this.
So many sociology departments.
But do you know, when we get our criticisms, Rima, it's that we're not rigorous. And that because we talk about different subjects each episode, that we're somehow not intellectually robust. Given the example of Surviving Society, but more broadly, like you apathetic sociologists, come on.
No, I think
we need you.
Yeah, I completely understand how you feel, and I'm still, I will stay up at night reading and rereading and rereading some journal articles that are written in such a deliberately obfuscatory, confusing way, because I'm like, if I can understand and begin to write like this and think like this and speak like this, that's my key to, that top part of the ivory tower. But I think gradually I'm realising that, it's all illusion. It's all constructed. It's all an imaginary. And we are here now, and we can create the sort of discourse, the sort of platforms that we want. Sociology is not a fixed element, It is, a tool of power, absolutely. And there are vested interests out there who are trying to keep it as it is. But I'm fed up of feeling that I'm stupid or feeling bad about myself. I've got published articles. I've got a full-time job. I've got students who esteem me, who have written things about me in their feedback that make me cry. And that is really, really valuable and important, And I think you guys, with what you've done so far, especially you, Chantal, you need to sort of take that away and sit with that. And,
look at Tiso's face.
And own it, as the Gen Zers say.
Yeah, millennials, we're not bold enough, are we?
No, not at all.
No.
But this is the thing, and I think what you're saying, Rima, makes sense. I think our parents' version was you assimilate, right? So assimilation means you just kind of there in the background. But the difference is now we have agency.
Absolutely,
and agency in a different way. So
that's it.
So I'm not looking to do a Pretty Patel or Rishi Sunak as I'm lifting at the drawbridge. I have agency, so I'm aware of this structural matters, and I'm looking to change that. And this is what's different now, right? So we're saying, like, listen, it's not an individualized thing because there's always an exception to the rule. There's always some successful people, but I'm looking to change the system so they can be, so we can not even be. I am British. I'm from here. I'm a London, whatever it is.
Yeah,
I am from here, and I'm going to have agency. And that's what people. It's kind of shocking, really. It's quite radical, but yeah.
I love that.
Completely agree.
That's a great place to end. Thank you for that.
It's the trainers, right?
It's the trainers. What are they called?
Sneakers Harachi. Listen, you're only going to see me in these.
Honestly,
I just can't stop looking at them.
I've never seen you wear trainers 2 days in a row.
I said it, my dad's this way.
Oh, okay, fine. And what's special about these? That they dropped on one day only.
Listen, read the date.
8/8/21, the 8th of August 2021. They came out.
You're not advertising Nike.
Oh, right.
Nike, yes we are. Yes we are. And if you want to send me free trainers, go on.
Rima, thank you so much for joining us. That was such an enriching conversation.
It's always a pleasure. I say always like I'm on here every week.
No, but you are. Your spirit is your critical spirit is definitely something which we carry on this show.
We've survived, and that is just absolutely phenomenal. We've not just survived, we've thrived, and touch wood. And I'm telling this to my mum. Touch wood. I have to carry a wooden plank around with me at all times. And I just think what you're doing with this podcast is fantastic, and keep on at it.
Oh, thank you so much, Rima. Listeners, thank you for joining us as usual, and we will see you again next week.
See you next week.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the T's and C's with Tisa and Chantel. You can now continue the conversation with us on Twitter and Instagram.